What if they came for your children, not in the dead of night, not with ski masks and a getaway van, but with a polite knock on the door, a professional suit, and a clipboard under their arm? They look official, they sound official, they say they're from social services, and they need to see your children, right now. And the chilling part, they know their names. For hundreds of families across the United Kingdom in the 1990s, this wasn't just a scary thought, it was a terrifying reality that kicked off a nationwide panic. This is the story of the phantom social workers, the massive police investigation they sparked, and how, after all these years, it's like they just vanished without a trace. It all started in the autumn of 1990. Across the UK, from the sprawling council estates of northern England to the quiet suburbs of the south, a pattern of bizarre and deeply unsettling encounters began to take shape. It almost always started the same way: a knock on the door, usually during the day. The people on the other side were consistently described as well-dressed and articulate, often a man and a woman working as a pair. They carried briefcases, wore smart suits, and spoke with an air of authority that was incredibly hard to question. They'd claimed to be social workers, there to investigate a supposed complaint of child neglect or abuse. The homeowners, most of whom were mothers at home with young kids, were suddenly thrown into a nightmare of confusion and fear. These visitors were unnervingly convincing. They often knew personal details like the names and ages of the children inside, and sometimes even which schools they went to. This didn't feel like a random visit. It felt targeted, personal, and deeply invasive. Their demand was always the same. They needed to come inside to conduct a physical examination of the children. They'd insist it was urgent, a matter of official protocol. For any parent, it's a horrifying scenario. You're being accused of something awful by people who look like they have the full weight of the government behind them. And yet, something felt off. When parents pushed back, when they asked for official identification, the phantoms would either show fake credentials or get flustered, making up excuses before leaving abruptly. In some instances, their behaviour was even bolder. There were reports of these imposters trying to physically take children from their homes, claiming they were being placed into care. One terrified mother in Rotherham reported that a woman tried to lead her 2-year-old son away, only stopping when the mother screamed for her husband. In another incident, a man told a mother he was there to inspect her daughter's bedroom for signs of abuse. When she refused to let him in, he just calmly walked away, leaving her shaken to her core. These weren't clumsy criminals, they were calm, collected, and methodical, which only made them more terrifying. As local newspapers started reporting on these strange encounters, the stories spread like wildfire. What first seemed like isolated incidents soon revealed themselves to be part of a much larger, seemingly coordinated phenomenon. Reports flooded in from dozens of towns and cities: Manchester, Nottingham, Sunderland, and even across Scotland. The media gave them a name: the phantom social workers. The consistency in the descriptions was chilling. The smart clothes, the polite but firm demeanour, the specific knowledge of the families, it all pointed to a level of organisation that went far beyond a simple hoax. This sparked a moral panic across the nation. Parents were terrified. Who were these people? What could they possibly want? The most obvious and terrifying theory was that this was a sophisticated network of child abductors. The fear was real. Parents stopped letting their children play outside. They answered every knock at the door with a sense of dread. The very people meant to protect children, social workers, were now the face of a national nightmare. The media frenzy only amplified the terror. Tabloid headlines screamed about child-snatching gangs, feeding the public's deepest anxieties. Every new report, whether confirmed or just a rumour, added to the growing legend. The psychological toll was immense. Some women who reported these incidents were met with scepticism from authorities, who initially couldn't grasp the scale of what was happening. Some reported feeling gaslighted or dismissed, told they'd probably just misunderstood, a visit visit from a real health worker. This only added to their trauma, leaving them feeling helpless and alone. The panic didn't just stay behind closed doors, it put legitimate social services in an impossible position. Real social workers, doing their vital job of protecting vulnerable children, were suddenly met with fear and hostility. They were refused entry into homes where children were genuinely at risk. The very system designed to prevent harm was being paralyzed by these phantoms who had stolen its identity. The scare had managed to weaponize trust itself. As the number of reports surged into the hundreds, police forces across the country knew they were dealing with something serious. This wasn't just a string of local disturbances, it felt like a nationwide event. In response, South Yorkshire Police launched Operation Childcare in 1990. It grew into a massive investigation, eventually involving 23 separate police forces, making it one of the largest of its kind in British history. An incident room was set up with dozens of officers whose sole job was to catalogue and connect the hundreds of sightings pouring in from all over the UK. But the investigation was a nightmare from the very beginning. These phantoms left behind almost no physical evidence. They were ghosts. They didn't force their way into homes, so there were no fingerprints from a break-in. Their visits were brief, and they vanished as quickly as they appeared. The descriptions of them, while consistent in terms of dress and manner, were often too generic to create a useful composite sketch. They were just a man in a suit or a well-dressed woman. Operation Childcare looked into over 250 separate reports, but the deeper they dug, the more baffling the case became. Police struggled to substantiate most of the claims, attributing many to rumour or misunderstandings amplified by the climate of fear. However, investigators remained convinced that a core number of the reports were absolutely genuine. In fact, police stated that 2 of the cases were the genuine article, though they never publicly elaborated on which cases these were or what made them so certain. Despite the massive resources poured into the operation, police were stumped. They had no suspects, no arrests, and most importantly, no clear motive. Why would an organised group go to such elaborate lengths only to back down the second they were challenged? If their goal was abduction, they were failing spectacularly. It just didn't add up. By 1994, with no new leads and no arrests made, both Operation Childcare and a similar unit in Scotland were quietly shut down. The phantoms had won. They had terrorised an entire nation and then simply melted away. With the official investigation closed and no one ever caught, the big question remains: who were the phantom social workers? Over the years, several theories have bubbled up, each trying to make sense of this unsettling mystery. The first and most sinister is that this really was a network of would-be child abductors. The idea here is that these individuals were scoping out potential targets, testing how secure homes were and how assertive parents might be. Maybe they were looking for vulnerable families or specific kinds of children. Their tactic of backing off when challenged could have been a smart way to gather information for a future attempt without getting caught. But the sheer scale of it, happening all across the country, makes it seem like an incredibly elaborate and risky plan. A second theory, pushed by some criminologists, suggests the culprits weren't abductors at all, but misguided vigilantes. In this version of events, they were self-appointed child abuse investigators who genuinely believed they were uncovering neglect. This might explain why they were so focused on inspections and their official-seeming act. They weren't trying to steal children, but to save them, operating under their own twisted moral code. This theory makes sense of why they would leave when challenged by a confident parent. They had no real authority to back them up. A third, and maybe even more disturbing theory, is that the whole thing was a form of mass hysteria, a moral panic whipped up by media hype and social anxiety. This perspective suggests that a few real, isolated impersonation incidents were blown way out of proportion by rumour and sensational news coverage, creating a feedback loop of fear. In this paranoid climate, a door-to-door salesperson, a market researcher, or a mistaken visit from an actual official could easily be twisted into a terrifying encounter. It's been compared to modern urban legends like the Men in Black, where mysterious figures appear and vanish, leaving only confusion behind. While this theory explains the panic, it doesn't quite account for those core, credible reports that multiple police forces believed were genuine. And finally, there's the darkest possibility that it was all part of something far more organised and sinister than we can even guess. The truth is, we just don't know. And that's what makes this case so profoundly disturbing. The wave of phantom social workers faded away in the mid-1990s just as mysteriously as it had started. Although isolated copycat incidents have been reported since, including a confirmed case in Gloucestershire in 2014 where a woman posing as a social worker examined a baby, the nationwide siege of fear was over. The perpetrators were never identified. Their motives remain a complete mystery. They knocked on doors, terrified families, and then vanished from history, leaving behind nothing but a legacy of fear and a story with no resolution. The fact that a group of people could organise on such a scale, cause a national panic, trigger a massive police investigation, and get away with it completely is perhaps the most terrifying part of all. They remain phantoms, a dark footnote in British criminal history. So I have to ask, what do you think was really happening here? Was it an organised abduction ring, misguided vigilantes, or a case of mass hysteria? Let me know your theories in the comments below. The story of the phantom social workers is a chilling reminder of how easily the fabric of trust in our society can be torn apart. It shows how quickly fear can spread and how some mysteries are never solved. They just leave us with a lingering sense of unease and one final, haunting question. Who was knocking on the door?